But the big packet, I will at least admit that the last 2.5 pages are just figures. But that's still a lot of strips. And so what I feel like the best way to do this is, so we can quickly answer questions, is to start off with a working understanding about energy, which that's what chapters 9 and 10 are about, and that's why these are called 9 something and then 10 something. So both of the chapters are about energy. So chapter 9 is about the process of cellular respiration. We'll talk a little bit about this in just a second. But I'm not writing that anymore. That's too long, so I'm just going to write CR. And chapter 10 is about photosynthesis. So I'm not writing that anymore. I'm just going to put PS. So, in general, if you want to think about cellular respiration is what organisms do, where that they're going to take energy from consumed or stored molecules. So for us it'd be food. And you get the energy from breaking the bonds in there, and you're going to use it to do work. So let's just write that this is about managing the energy from breaking bonds. Photosynthesis is different. So photosynthesis is something that only producers do. Every living thing does cellular respiration, plants included. So only plants are going to do photosynthesis, though, producers. They're going to be able to use light energy, and they're going to be able to make complex molecules by using that light energy to make the bonds. So here's the main thing when you think about it. Obviously, we're talking about management of energy through the use of different molecules that have bonds holding the atoms together. And all living things need energy to do work. So we're just going to make that statement. So I'm just going to use systems. And we'll go through and talk about some things that are considered work, but that's what this is. Cellular work. So if you break bonds, you get energy. If you make bonds from light, then you're going to store that in molecules and their bonds. So when we think about this whole piece here with bonds, I want to start off by just explaining how that you get energy from breaking bonds, because I think there's some misconceptions there. So let's just do from here. So how is energy released? From breaking bonds. What you're going to go from is something that, let's just use an example. So here's glucose. And when we take glucose and we go through cellular respiration and you break bonds, you end up with carbon dioxide being formed and water. So how do we get energy from that? Well, the way this will work as far as how energy is released is the bonds in glucose are weak, which means they don't want to stay together because they're unstable. So the conformation of the bonds in glucose, they're not stable. You move from weak, unstable bonds in the glucose molecule to stable and strong bonds, because carbon dioxide and water, they're very stable. So stable, strong bonds. when you move from weak, unstable to stable and strong, so you're rearranging these atoms in different forms, and the way that you're putting them together in the products, your bonds are more stable. And you recoup this energy. So you have energy released. And really what it is it's from that bond rearrangement where you rearrange the atoms. So we're just going to go with the simple part though. You get energy released from breaking those bonds. That's how this works. So you're moving from an unstable form to a stable form. And when you move to a stable form, if you really want to think about it, it looks more like this. So you have weak, and you move to stable, and this right through here would be the energy that's released from breaking the bond. So if the bonds are weak, and you move to stable bonds, that drop in energy is what you're going to get. So now we need to think about, what does this actually look like? Because this is a real problem, managing the energy coming out of bonds. And I'm just going to write, I'm going to leave a little space up here. I'm not going to write up here because I'm going to write something really big all the way across, because it's the story of both of the chapters. But I want to start off with, what do you get when you break bonds? So, what is there to manage, really? When bonds are broken. Because that's the story of cellular respiration. So, one component is going to be, energy is going to be released when that bond's broken right in the moment. So you're going to have some energy is released in the moment. So when it happens, you have to have a plan for what you're going to do for that energy that's going to be released right then. And there's two main ways that living things deal with this. I've got energy right now. It's not a huge amount. It's not unmanageable. So let's put here that this is manageable. Manageable? Is that what I said? I did. So, okay, this is manageable. It's doable. It's fixable. We can use it. So that means usable. Maybe that's a better word. I'm going to leave both. One way this energy is managed and used is you're going to let this process of breaking bonds be part of a pathway. So allow the breaking of bonds to be part of a pathway. And we know what a pathway is. A pathway is just a sequence of reactions and products that are put together, and you end up going from a first reactant through a series of steps to a final product. We've looked at that before. So if you let things be part of this breaking of bonds to be part of a pathway, what you end up being able to do is you don't, like, let's go back over here with glucose. You don't just break all those bonds all at once and somehow manage to get carbon dioxide and water. You're going to sequence stepwise break the bonds. And so you don't do it all at one time. So what you end up with then is you have a stepwise process of breaking a series of bonds in a controlled fashion. And when this process is going on, you're going to couple any type of reaction that's going to require energy, so endergonic reactions with exergonic, and so the exergonic will fuel the endergonic reactions. So in the pathway, you have some reactions that need energy, some reactions that release energy, and you couple those together as you're breaking bonds. So breaking bonds will give you energy that is used to fuel other reactions that need it. That's a really common way to manage the energy that you get, that manageable, usable energy as you break bonds. We'll just break them in a pathway so that there's this give and take of where that energy that's released is used. That's the number one way. The other way that you can use the energy that would come from breaking a bond is you can make ATP. So ATP, what we said, was the currency. It's the walking around money, the spending money of the cell. It is a manageable, usable amount of energy. So you could make ATP from that energy that's released, and the way you would do that is you would take ADP, so this has the 2 phosphate bonds on adenosine, ATP has 3, you would add that PI, that inorganic phosphate, to ADP, and you would make ATP, and the energy here, this would be the energy that you would use to create ATP. So this is the tedious part, where that back in the day you had to memorize all of these pathways. So you had to memorize all the steps in glycolysis, and all of the steps in pyruvate oxidation, and all of the steps in the Krebs cycle, because that's what this is. This is managing that bond energy by putting it into pathways. Here's the big problem. When bonds are broken, there are electrons that are associated with those bonds that have to go somewhere. So you're going to have electrons to manage, and they can't be released. That would be horrific. And I'm not going to write electrons anymore. I'm just going to write that. So these electrons that are part of this bond, they have to be managed. So electrons can't be released. Oh my gosh, that would be awful. So there has to be this transfer system. They have to be handed off and accounted for and managed the whole time. Okay, so I'll come back for just a second. Okay, so I'll come back to that in a second. I just want to be dramatic, and it just so happens I happen to live somewhere where I can be dramatic. If you think about electrons, like, don't let them go, don't let them go. You got to constantly monitor where they are. You got to have something with them all the time. Sounds a little bit like a serial killer. So we're going to think about it like that. Think about electrons as serial killers. Way, way too much to manage. Okay? So we're going to think about this electron piece as there is way too much energy like scary too much energy to do work directly. So, speaking of serial killers, did you know that you live 60 miles, 45 miles, I don't know how far Pound, Virginia is from here. My mom's from there. She's really from Appalachia, but still, it's all the same thing. Did you know we have a Supermax prison there? We do. So I'll show you. Here's what we have. It's called Red Onion. Crazy, but it's named, I think, because of the way the shape of it is. So it is a Supermax prison right over, just over the border into Virginia and Wise County, near Pound. And they have, like, when we talk Supermax, it's just crazy. Like, it is extreme kind of population. Literally, worst of the worst. And they're the ones that they can't manage at other places. So, crazy too, I didn't know this, but HBO did a documentary on Inside Red Onion. So, there's famous people there. There's the guy that was the sniper and shot people, like, if they were on the highway or whatever, he's there, and all kinds of crazy people. But, okay, so this is my whole thing. Now that we have context, that's what an electron is. Okay? So, whoa. You would never want it to be on its own. It would always have to be transferred. You would have to have something that could hold it and handle it. So this is the management part that's going to give you the most energy when you break a bond. It's taking electrons and managing their energy in order to squeeze it out in little manageable, can be used to do work doses. So in that way, now we're going to think about electrons as toothpaste. So nobody takes a tube of toothpaste and just opens it up and puts the whole thing in their mouth. You just squeeze out the amount that's the right amount to do work. So you're going to have this way too much amount, and you're just going to sequentially squeeze out a bit of energy from the electron that's going to be the right amount to do work. So you've got this serial killer, and what you'll do is by the time you just squeeze out energy and do work with that energy, by the time that it's done, he's like, you know, Mr. Rogers, and he can live next door and babysit your kids. So you're able to get all of that crazy dangerousness out by sequentially passing the electron to different acceptors, okay, that are going to hold on to it, and every time the electron drops in energy. And that little drop of energy, little drop in energy that the electron has, you use to do work. So this is the scary part of bonds. What are you going to do? So this is the tedious part. Like, we got to know what all these pathways are. So the two, like down here, let's just name it and claim it. Over here, as you're going to put pathways to manage that little bit of energy that comes out at a time. Now, this is both. This is both. You have both of these happening. So you got to manage that little bit of energy, and you do that through processes, pathways. So the first is called glycolysis. The second is called pyruvate oxidation, and the third is called Krebs cycle. Those are the pathways that are going to couple these reactions, and we're going to end up being able to break bonds and use the energy as we go. Electrons, on the other hand, so if you think about their little rehabilitation facility, that's going to be the electron transport chain. So this is where you sequentially squeeze out energy and pass it, until you actually have this docile, calm, non-energetic electron, Mr. Rogers, and you can end up with something like it's not dangerous anymore. You can give it to something and it's actually going to be where that it's okay to give it. But up here, you've got to deal with the fact that, what am I going to do with this thing? It has got ridiculous danger associated with it because there's so much energy. Well, you better stepwise bring that energy out, because you can't release it all at once. So if we can kind of keep in our heads that this part's tedious, like nobody likes to memorize pathways. It's just, how do you manage the breaking of the bonds so that you end up with different molecules that are more stable every time you do. This is about the molecule conversion. This is about managing the electrons that come out of these broken bonds in a way that's like not dangerous. So even though this is tedious and we have pathways and this is like scary, and we have this whole process of, you can see why it's called a chain, because you give it from one to the other. This is what's involved with it. But in general, this is my story. If you'll keep in your head that you want to follow the electron, like that's the key to chapters 9 and 10. If you're always thinking about, whoa, did you break a bond? What are you going to do with the electron? You're going to be fine. Because if you break a bond, it's going to be in a pathway and there's going to be some process involved. And you're going to have to think about, like, okay, so if you're going to break glucose down and you can't go straight to carbon dioxide, what did it get to be next? Then what did you break? Well, I broke this bond and then this was formed. All of that's not fun, but that's pretty simple. But every time you break a bond, you better deal with that electron. How are you going to deal with it? So if you'll keep all that in your head, we can do those strips much quicker. Okay? That's really what it boils down to. So we've said it's bond energy management. It is electron management. Both. Same thing when you do chapter 10 and chapter 9. Okay, so I hope that helps. We'll start doing some strips, and then it'll always be in context of, okay, you broke a bond. What pathway are you in? What are you doing? You broke a bond? How are you going to manage the electron? What are you going to do with them? So that's going to be the 2 steps in our thinking. Okay? Ooh, those look like a little antennae. Thank you for listening. I know that this is going to be a tough unit, but I hope if we can keep this context in our head, we can quickly move through some of those questions. So there's the first page notes. It goes on 2 pages, but there's the second page.